I'm Marcus Rivera, 27 years old, and my stubbornness almost got me killed. That flight attendant begged me to get off the plane, and I refused to listen. Looking back, I can't believe how close I came to losing everything because I thought I knew better. The pain of nearly destroying my life because of my own arrogance still keeps me awake at night. Before I tell you how my pride and stupidity nearly cost me my life, please hit that like button, subscribe, and comment below where you're watching from. Your support means everything to me as I share this incredibly painful story. You have to understand something about me to get why I made such a catastrophic mistake. I've always been the guy who thinks he knows better than everyone else. My mother used to tell me that my stubbornness would be the death of me, and damn it, she was almost right. I was flying from Denver to Phoenix that Tuesday morning, and I was absolutely furious about having to take this trip in the first place. See, I'm a software engineer for a tech startup, and my boss had just dropped this emergency client meeting on me with less than 24 hours notice. I was supposed to be presenting our new security software to potential investors, and this last-minute trip was threatening to derail everything I'd worked for over the past 2 years. I was already angry at the world, already convinced that everyone around me was incompetent, and that attitude was about to nearly get me killed. The flight was packed, which only added to my irritation. I hate crowded flights, hate being pressed up against strangers, hate the whole cattle car experience of modern air travel. But what really set me off was when the flight attendant started her safety demonstration and I noticed her watching me specifically. Her name tag said Jennifer, and she kept glancing in my direction like I was some kind of problem passenger. I was in seat 14C, middle seat, sandwiched between a businessman who smelled like too much cologne and an elderly woman who kept coughing without covering her mouth. Perfect. Just absolutely perfect. I pulled out my laptop to review my presentation notes, trying to ignore everything around me because that's what I do when I'm angry. I shut everyone out and focus on work. That's when Jennifer approached with the drink cart, and that's when my life almost ended because I was too stubborn and too angry to listen to someone who was trying to save me. She handed me my coffee, black, just like I'd ordered. But there was something else with it, a small piece of paper folded underneath the cup. At first, I thought it was just airline paperwork or maybe a receipt. But when I unfolded it, my blood ran cold. Not because I understood the danger, but because I was furious that someone was playing games with me. The note was written in shaky handwriting, "Emergency, fake illness now." I looked up at Jennifer, and she was staring at me with this desperate expression. Her face was pale, her hands were trembling slightly, and she mouthed the words, "Please trust me." But did I listen? Did I show even an ounce of humility or consideration? Hell no. I was so consumed with my own anger and self-importance that I crumpled up that note and shoved it in my pocket. I thought she was absolutely crazy. Here I am, trying to prepare for the most important presentation of my career, already stressed about this last-minute trip, and now some flight attendant is trying to involve me in whatever drama she's got going on. I was convinced she was either having some kind of mental breakdown or trying to pull me into some ridiculous scheme. The businessman next to me noticed the exchange and raised an eyebrow, but I just shook my head and went back to my laptop. I was determined to ignore whatever nonsense Jennifer thought she was pulling. This is the kind of arrogance that almost cost me my life. The absolute certainty that I knew better than everyone else, that my problems were more important than anyone else's concerns. 20 minutes later, Jennifer came back. This time, she knelt down beside my seat, pretending to pick something up from the floor. Her voice was barely a whisper, but I could hear the desperation and terror in it. "Please," she said, "you have to get off this plane. Tell them you're sick. Food poisoning, anything. I've been flying for 15 years and I've never done anything like this. But you're in danger." And what did I do? What did my stubborn, arrogant, know-it-all self do? I looked at her with complete disdain and said, "Lady, I don't know what your problem is, but I've got work to do. Leave me alone." The pain I feel remembering those words, the absolute disgust I have for my past self in that moment, it's overwhelming. Here was someone risking her job, her career, everything to try to save my life, and I treated her like she was an inconvenience. The shame of that moment still burns in my chest like acid. Jennifer's face went pale. I mean, she looked like she'd seen a ghost. Her hands started shaking more violently, and she leaned in closer. "You have no idea what's coming," she whispered, and there was something in her voice that should have scared me, should have made me listen. But instead, it just made me angrier. "Are you threatening me?" I snapped, loud enough that other passengers started looking over. "Because if you are, I'll report you to your supervisor the second we land." The businessman next to me was now openly staring, and the elderly woman had stopped coughing to listen in. Jennifer stood up slowly, her face completely drained of color, and I could see tears starting to form in her eyes. "I'm trying to save your life," she said quietly, "but I can't force you to listen." She walked away, and I went back to my laptop, feeling smug and self-righteous. I was convinced I'd just handled an unstable employee, that I'd stood up for myself against someone who was clearly having some kind of breakdown. The level of self-satisfaction I felt in that moment makes me sick to think about now. But here's the thing that should have clued me in, the thing that my arrogance prevented me from seeing. After Jennifer walked away, I started noticing things. Small things that my software engineer brain should have picked up on, but my anger and stubbornness made me dismiss. The businessman next to me wasn't actually reading his newspaper. His eyes weren't moving across the page. He'd been staring at the same article for over 30 minutes, but every few minutes, he'd glance around the cabin like he was looking for something or someone. 3 rows behind me, there was a guy in a baseball cap who kept checking his phone, but he never seemed to be actually using it. He'd pick it up, look at the screen for a few seconds, then put it back down, over and over again, like he was waiting for a signal. In the row across from me, there was a woman in a business suit who had her laptop open, but she wasn't typing. She was just sitting there, staring at a blank screen, occasionally glancing around the cabin with the same nervous energy as baseball cap guy. Any reasonable person would have started to feel uneasy. Any person with an ounce of common sense would have begun to wonder if maybe, just maybe, the flight attendant knew something they didn't. But not me. Oh no, not Marcus Rivera, the guy who always knows better than everyone else. I convinced myself that I was being paranoid, that the stress of the presentation was making me see patterns that weren't there. I told myself that people act weird on planes all the time, that there was nothing unusual about any of this. The level of self-deception I engaged in that day, the way I deliberately ignored every warning sign because I was too proud to admit I might be wrong, it's a level of stupidity that still makes me furious with myself. About 40 minutes into the flight, Jennifer made one more attempt to save my stubborn ass. She came by with a cart, pretending to collect trash, but when she got to my row, she leaned in close again. "Last chance," she whispered. "Tell them you need medical attention. Tell them you're having chest pains. Anything. Please." And I looked at her, this woman who was literally putting her career on the line to try to save my life, and I said the words that I will regret for the rest of my life. "If you don't stop harassing me, I'm going to have you arrested when we land. I don't know what scam you're trying to pull, but I'm not falling for it." Jennifer stepped back like I'd slapped her. The hurt in her eyes, the absolute devastation on her face when she realized that I wasn't going to listen, that I was choosing my own arrogance over my own safety. I can still see it clearly. She nodded slowly, tears now openly streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm so sorry." She walked away and I thought I'd won. I thought I'd successfully dealt with a problematic employee and could now focus on my presentation in peace. The businessman next to me actually gave me a little nod of approval, like I'd handled that well. I felt vindicated, justified in my dismissal of Jennifer's warnings. This is the part where my stupidity really shines through, where my complete inability to consider that maybe, just maybe, someone else might know something I didn't almost got me killed. Because you see, I didn't just ignore Jennifer's warnings. I actively worked against my own safety by being so determined to prove that I was right and she was wrong. When the captain came on the intercom about an hour later to announce that we were beginning our descent into Phoenix, I felt a sense of satisfaction. See? Nothing had happened. No emergency, no danger, no whatever Jennifer thought she was warning me about. I was right. She was wrong. And now I could get off this plane and get on with my important business. But as we started descending, Things began to change in ways that even my stubborn brain couldn't ignore anymore. The businessman next to me suddenly got very active with his phone, typing rapidly and glancing around nervously. Baseball cap guy stood up and went to the bathroom, but he didn't actually go in. He just stood there for a moment looking around the cabin before sitting back down. Business suit woman closed her laptop and put it away, but then immediately pulled out her phone and started what looked like a text conversation. She kept looking at her watch, then at other passengers, then back at her phone. And here's where my software engineer brain finally started to kick in, where pattern recognition began to override my stubbornness. These people weren't acting randomly. They were coordinating. They were all waiting for something, and that something was tied to our descent into Phoenix. I started to feel the first real stirrings of unease, but even then, even with all the evidence mounting around me, I was too proud to admit that Jennifer might have been right. I told myself that I was being paranoid, that the stress was getting to me, that there was some innocent explanation for all this synchronized behavior. The plane continued its descent, and the tension in the cabin became almost palpable. More passengers were acting strangely now. A guy in the back row kept standing up and sitting down. A woman near the front was fidgeting with something in her purse. Two men in different parts of the plane kept making eye contact and nodding at each other. And Jennifer, poor Jennifer, who I'd treated like absolute garbage, was moving through the cabin with this look of resigned terror on her face. Every time she glanced in my direction, I could see the guilt and sadness in her eyes. She tried to save me, and I'd thrown it back in her face with cruelty and arrogance. That's when the captain's voice came back on the intercom, but this time, there was something different about his tone, something strained and urgent. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some minor technical difficulties. We're going to need to circle the airport for a few more minutes before landing. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin. Technical difficulties. In all my years of flying, I'd never heard that phrase used so casually for something that required circling the airport. Real technical difficulties get you emergency priority landing. Real technical difficulties get you fire trucks on the runway. This sounded like a stall tactic. And that's when it hit me like a freight train. That's when 2 hours of ignored warnings, dismissed concerns, and arrogant self-righteousness came crashing down on me with the force of a tsunami. Jennifer hadn't been crazy. She hadn't been having a breakdown. She'd known something was going to happen during our descent into Phoenix, and she tried to save me from it. The businessman next to me was now openly talking on his phone in what sounded like a foreign language. Baseball cap guy was moving to a different seat. Business suit woman was opening her laptop again, but this time she was typing furiously, like she was sending urgent messages. I looked around the cabin with new eyes, and what I saw terrified me. At least 8 passengers who had seemed perfectly normal during takeoff were now acting with coordinated purpose. They were all waiting for something, and that something was supposed to happen when we landed in Phoenix. My hands started shaking as the full magnitude of my stupidity crashed over me. Jennifer had tried to save my life, and I'd been too arrogant, too angry, too convinced of my own superiority to listen. She'd risked everything to warn a complete stranger, and I'd threatened to have her arrested. The rage I felt at myself in that moment was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Not just anger, but pure, concentrated fury at my own arrogance, my own blindness, my own complete inability to consider that maybe someone else might know something I didn't. I wanted to punch myself, wanted to scream at my own stupidity, wanted to go back in time and shake some sense into the arrogant idiot I'd been just hours earlier. 2 hours later, I would realize that she had saved my life, even though I'd done everything in my power to prevent her from doing so. But I'm getting ahead of myself again, because the real horror of what I'd done, the full scope of my life-threatening stupidity, wouldn't become clear until we finally landed in Phoenix and I discovered exactly what Jennifer had been trying to save me from. The plane touched down with what felt like unusual force, jarring me out of my growing panic. As we taxied to the gate, I watched the coordinated passengers with growing dread. They weren't celebrating a successful landing. They weren't relieved to be on the ground. Instead, they all seemed to be waiting for something else, something that was supposed to happen now that we were in Phoenix. The businessman next to me was the first to stand up when the seatbelt sign went off, But he didn't head for the overhead compartments like everyone else. Instead, he moved toward the back of the plane, passing 3 specific rows and making eye contact with baseball cap guy and business suit woman. It wasn't casual. It wasn't accidental. It was a signal. I sat there, frozen by the realization of how monumentally I'd screwed up, watching as these people who I'd dismissed as nervous flyers revealed themselves to be part of something much more sinister. And Jennifer, sweet Jennifer who I'd treated like dirt, was watching them too, her face a mask of professional calm that couldn't quite hide the terror underneath. As passengers began filing off the plane, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The 8 people I'd identified as acting strangely weren't leaving. They were repositioning themselves throughout the cabin, like they were setting up for something. Baseball cap guy moved to the front rows. Business suit woman positioned herself near the emergency exit. 2 men I hadn't paid attention to before were now standing in the aisle, blocking normal passenger flow. And that's when I heard it. A conversation between baseball cap guy and someone on his phone, and he wasn't trying to be quiet anymore. Yeah, we're on the ground. Target's still on board. Moving to phase 2. Target. They'd said target. And suddenly, with crystal clarity that felt like being hit by lightning, I understood what Jennifer had been trying to tell me. I wasn't just a random passenger on this flight. I was the reason these people were here. I was their target. The terror that flooded through me in that moment was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Not just fear, but absolute horror at the realization that my stubborn refusal to listen to Jennifer's warnings had put me in the exact position these people wanted me in. I was trapped on a plane with people who meant to harm me, and I'd actively prevented my own rescue because I was too arrogant to trust someone who was trying to help. I sat there, paralyzed by fear and self-loathing, as the reality of my situation crashed over me. These people had planned this. They'd known I'd be on this flight, had positioned themselves strategically throughout the cabin, and had waited until we were on the ground in Phoenix to make their move. And Jennifer, somehow, had known about it and had tried to get me off the plane before it was too late. Business suit woman was now moving down the aisle toward me, and there was nothing casual about her approach. Her hand was inside her jacket, and her eyes were locked on mine with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Behind me, I could hear the businessman getting up from his seat, and when I turned to look, I saw that he was moving toward me too. I was surrounded, trapped, and it was entirely my own fault. That's when Jennifer appeared beside my seat, and I've never been so grateful to see another human being in my entire life. But the look on her face wasn't relief or triumph at being proven right. It was pure anguish because she knew what was about to happen, and she knew she'd failed to prevent it. "I'm sorry," she whispered, and I could see tears in her eyes. "I tried to warn you. I tried so hard." Business suit woman was 3 rows away now, and I could see something metallic glinting in her jacket. Behind me, the businessman was 2 seats back and closing fast. Baseball cap guy was moving down the aisle from the front, cutting off any escape route toward the exit. And that's when my software engineer brain finally started working properly. Pattern recognition kicked in with devastating clarity, and I understood not just what was happening, but how it had been planned and why Jennifer had known about it. "You're not just a flight attendant," I said to Jennifer, the pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. "You're law enforcement." She nodded, her professional mask slipping for just a moment. "FBI, undercover. We've been tracking these people for months, and we knew they were planning something on this flight. When I saw your name on the passenger manifest, I knew you were the target. The target. Me, Marcus Rivera, stubborn software engineer who thought he knew better than everyone else. But why? What made me important enough for an 8-person coordinated operation? The security software you've been developing," Jennifer continued, her voice barely audible over the noise of passengers still deplaning around us. "The encryption protocols. Your company doesn't know it, but you've created something that could revolutionize military communications. These people represent a foreign intelligence service that wants to acquire your work, along with the person who created it. Foreign intelligence. Kidnapping. All because I'd been too proud and too angry to listen when someone tried to save me from exactly this scenario. The rage I felt at myself was so intense it was almost physically painful. I'd been warned, repeatedly and desperately, by someone who was literally risking her life and her mission to save me, and I'd thrown it back in her face because I thought I knew better. Business Suit Woman was now just one row away, and I could see that what she was holding wasn't just metallic, it was a syringe. They weren't planning to kill me here on the plane. They were planning to sedate me and take me somewhere else, somewhere they could extract everything I knew about my encryption work. What do we do? I whispered to Jennifer, finally ready to listen, finally willing to admit that someone else might know better than me. Nothing, she said, and the defeat in her voice was heartbreaking. It's too late. You refused to get off when you had the chance, and now they have you exactly where they want you. I can't blow my cover to save you without compromising a larger operation that could save dozens of other people. The businessman was right behind me now. I could feel his presence, could sense him reaching into his jacket for whatever he was planning to use on me. Business Suit Woman was in the row next to mine, pretending to struggle with her overhead luggage while positioning herself for a clear approach. This was it. This was how my stubbornness, my arrogance, my absolute refusal to consider that someone else might know something I didn't, was going to end my life as I knew it. I was about to be kidnapped by foreign operatives because I'd been too proud to fake food poisoning when a federal agent begged me to get off the plane. The shame and terror of that moment, the absolute devastation of realizing that I'd engineered my own capture through nothing but stubborn pride, was overwhelming. I wanted to scream, wanted to rage at my own stupidity, wanted to apologize to Jennifer for doubting her and ruining her mission and probably getting myself killed in the process. But then something unexpected happened. Something that I still can't fully believe when I think back on it. The elderly woman who'd been coughing next to me throughout the flight suddenly stood up and started having what appeared to be a medical emergency. She clutched her chest, gasped for breath, and collapsed into the aisle right between me and Business Suit Woman. "Help!" she screamed. "I can't breathe. Someone help me." The reaction was immediate and chaotic. Passengers started shouting for medical assistance. Flight attendants came running from all directions. Business Suit Woman was forced to step back as people crowded around the collapsed woman, completely disrupting whatever coordinated approach the operatives had planned. In the confusion, Jennifer grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the front of the plane. "Move," she hissed. "Now." I stumbled after her, my legs shaking with terror and adrenaline, as she led me through the crowd of concerned passengers and toward the jet bridge. Behind us, I could hear Business Suit Woman trying to push through the crowd, but the medical emergency had created exactly the kind of chaos that makes coordinated operations impossible. We made it to the jet bridge, then to the gate area, then to a secure area of the airport that I didn't even know existed. It wasn't until we were behind locked doors with armed federal agents that Jennifer finally exhaled and looked at me with a mixture of relief and fury. "Do you have any idea?" she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "How close you came to disappearing forever? Do you understand that your stubborn refusal to listen to me almost cost you your life and potentially compromised months of investigation?" I couldn't speak. The magnitude of what had almost happened, the realization that I'd nearly been kidnapped by foreign operatives because I was too proud to admit that someone else might know something I didn't, had left me speechless with horror and self-loathing. "The elderly woman," I finally managed to croak. "Was she part of your operation?" Jennifer nodded. "Backup plan. Agent Chun has been with the Bureau for 30 years. When it became clear that you weren't going to cooperate with the primary extraction plan, she positioned herself to create a medical diversion if necessary." Agent Chun. The woman I'd been annoyed with for coughing. Another federal agent who'd been trying to protect me while I sat there thinking I was smarter than everyone around me. The levels of my own ignorance and arrogance were staggering. "They'll try again," Jennifer continued. "These people don't give up easily. You're going to need protection, and you're going to need to cooperate with federal authorities to help us catch the rest of their network." Protection. Witness protection, she meant. My life as I knew it was over, not because of any choice I'd made or any crime I'd committed, but because I'd developed software that foreign intelligence services wanted, and because I'd been too stubborn to listen when someone tried to save me from becoming their target. Over the next several hours, as FBI agents debriefed me and explained the full scope of the threat against me. The crushing weight of my own stupidity became impossible to ignore. These people had been tracking me for weeks. They'd known my flight schedule, my hotel reservations, my meeting locations. They'd planned an elaborate kidnapping operation that would have succeeded if not for Jennifer's intervention and my miraculous last-second rescue. And I'd almost prevented that rescue because I thought I knew better. Because I was angry about having to take a business trip and decided to take it out on a flight attendant who was literally risking her life to save mine. The aftermath was swift and comprehensive. The 8 operatives were arrested at various locations around Phoenix Airport. My software was classified as sensitive technology, and my company was brought under federal oversight. I was placed in protective custody while the FBI worked to dismantle the entire network that had been targeting American tech workers. But the personal aftermath, the psychological impact of realizing how close I'd come to destroying my own life through sheer arrogance, that took much longer to process. I spent the next 3 months in a safe house, working with federal agents to identify other potential targets and help them understand the vulnerabilities in the software I'd created. During that time, I had a lot of opportunity to think about the kind of person I'd become, the kind of person who could treat a federal agent's desperate warnings as harassment, who could be so consumed with my own problems that I couldn't see when someone was trying to save my life. The anger I felt at myself during those months was consuming. Not just anger at my stubbornness, but rage at the arrogance that had made me think I always knew better than everyone else. I'd spent years building an identity around being the smartest person in the room, the guy who could figure things out while everyone else fumbled around in ignorance. And that identity had almost gotten me kidnapped by foreign operatives. Jennifer visited me twice during my time in protective custody. The first time was purely professional. She needed me to identify some of the people who'd been on the plane and confirm details about their behavior. But the second time was personal, and it was one of the most difficult conversations of my life. "I need you to know," she said, sitting across from me in the sterile safe house living room, "that I don't blame you for not trusting me. Passengers get approached by unstable crew members sometimes. You had no way of knowing I was legitimate. But I couldn't accept that absolution. Couldn't let myself off the hook that easily." "Yes, I did," I said, and the words tasted bitter in my mouth. "I had plenty of ways of knowing. I saw the coordinated behavior of the other passengers. I saw your genuine terror. I had every clue I needed, and I ignored all of them because I was too angry and too proud to consider that someone else might know something I didn't." Jennifer was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was gentle but firm. "Marcus, I've been in law enforcement for 12 years. I've worked undercover operations, hostage negotiations, counterterrorism. And I've learned that sometimes the people we're trying to protect make it impossible for us to help them. You're not the first person to refuse assistance because they didn't understand the situation. But I'm the first person stupid enough to threaten to have you arrested for trying to save my life," I said, and the shame of that moment still burned like acid in my chest. She smiled then, the first real smile I'd seen from her since that terrible day on the plane. "You're also the first person who's shown this much genuine remorse about it. Most people just get defensive and try to justify their behavior. You're actually taking responsibility and trying to learn from it. Taking responsibility, learning from it." Those became the themes of my life over the following months as I worked to rebuild my sense of self and figure out how to move forward from such a devastating demonstration of my own limitations. When I was finally cleared to return to normal life 6 months later, everything had changed. My company had been acquired by a defense contractor. My software was now classified military technology. I had a new job, a new security clearance, and a new understanding of how dangerous my work could be. But the biggest change was in how I approached interactions with other people. The old Marcus, the one who always knew better than everyone else, who dismissed other people's concerns and trusted only his own judgment, that person was gone. Replaced by someone who understood that sometimes the people trying to help you seem crazy because you can't see what they see. I started volunteering with organizations that help victims of trafficking and kidnapping, using my technical skills to develop better communication and tracking systems. It was my way of trying to balance the scales, of doing something positive with the knowledge and abilities that had made me a target. Jennifer and I stayed in touch. Not romantic, our relationship had been forged in crisis and professional necessity, but as friends who'd been through something intense together. She eventually transferred to a different division of the FBI, working on cybersecurity threats against American infrastructure. About a year after the plane incident, she called me with news that brought the whole experience full circle. "We got the rest of them," she said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. "The intelligence network that was targeting you and other tech workers. 17 arrests across 3 countries. They won't be threatening anyone else. 17 people. An entire international operation that had been focused on stealing American technology and kidnapping the people who created it. And I'd almost walked right into their hands because I was too proud to listen to a warning." "There's something else," Jennifer continued. "Agent Chun wanted me to tell you something. She said that in 30 years of law enforcement, she's never seen someone learn from a mistake as thoroughly as you have. She's been following your volunteer work, and she's impressed by how you've turned this experience into something positive." Agent Chun. The elderly woman whose fake medical emergency had saved my life after I'd spent the entire flight being annoyed by her coughing. Another person I owed an apology to. Another person who'd risked herself to protect someone who didn't deserve it. Today, 3 years later, I still think about that flight every single day. Not just as a reminder of how close I came to disaster, but as a lesson about the kind of person I never want to be again. The kind of person who's so convinced of his own superiority that he can't recognize when someone is trying to help him. I've had other people try to give me advice since then. Friends, colleagues, family members who've noticed problems or dangers that I couldn't see. And every time, I remember Jennifer's pale face and desperate whisper, and I listen. Even when the advice seems wrong, even when I think I know better, I listen. Because sometimes the people trying to help us seem crazy because we can't see what they see. Sometimes our pride and anger and certainty make us blind to dangers that are obvious to others. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, those people will risk everything to save us anyway, even when we don't deserve it. My stubbornness almost cost me everything: my freedom, my life, my future. But it also taught me the most valuable lesson I've ever learned. That true intelligence isn't about always being right. It's about being smart enough to know when you might be wrong, and humble enough to listen when someone is trying to help you see what you're missing. Have you ever ignored good advice and regretted it? Have you ever been so sure you were right that you couldn't hear the people trying to warn you about dangers you couldn't see? Share your story below, because I've learned that we all have moments when our pride nearly destroys us, and talking about them helps us recognize them before it's too late. And remember to subscribe for more stories like this one. Stories about the moments when our worst qualities almost cost us everything, and how we can learn to be better. Because if my experience taught me anything, it's that the people who seem crazy might just be the ones trying to save your life.